clearly Bitcoin being open source software is protected under the First Amendment, but Lowery's framing of Bitcoin as a military technology brings in the possibility of it being protected under the Second Amendment in the United States. What are your guys' views on that?
So, practically speaking, of course, there's an entire body of jurisprudence around the Second Amendment, what it means, and I'm no expert on that. So there's going to be some headwinds maybe to getting something novel like Bitcoin or proof of work accepted, but just kind of generally philosophically, it fits that to a T, that it is a way that military grade, I don't want to say it that way, but military grade technology can be acquired by the common person to defend their own resources. So it is something that you can buy these provably costly bits, and then you can transmit them across the Bitcoin network in a provably costly way. You can take the defense of your own financial sovereignty into your hands. And so, I mean, it seems, I see the philosophical alignment with the Second Amendment. Of course, the practicality of it, there maybe is a leap to go from personal, like firearms, to under the Second Amendment, given the history of the jurisprudence there, protecting something like proof of work, a protocol. But a man can dream, and that would be excellent to see if there could be that philosophical and practical congruence.
I think you have the right to keep and bear arms. And it doesn't explicitly say firearms. It says arms. And in one of his talks, Lowery defines what an arm is. And an arm is simply the thing that you use to protect your resources from those who would take it, including and I'm quoting Lowery, including and specifically your government.
Of course, yeah.
Because inherently, we knew when we set up this country and we had great experience and had left it and had to try and engineer this great experiment in order to limit that power. And you must give people that which is theirs, which is their ability to defend that which gives them life and provides them an opportunity to move forth into the world and lower the entropy that surrounds them. I really love this argument because so let me think if I want to say this right. Protecting Bitcoin under the First Amendment is really hard to deny. And Lowery kind of tells that story. I think it was actually in an interview with you where he talks about he personally knows the lawyer that fought the PGP case. And he said it was originally classified under the Export Munitions Control. And then the argument that they brought was this harms no one. This is words and letters, and the famous story is that they printed it out and they laid it on the desk and they said, this is what you're limiting. This is not a grenade. This is not a missile. This is words and letters and numbers. And so they lay it there and they go, why wouldn't people not prove to us how this is something that people shouldn't have?
Munitions, yeah. It's just, it immediately became a First Amendment argument at that point. It's like irrefutably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to protect it then under, and I agree with Grant. And by the way, Grant is a phenomenal lawyer. And so he obviously doesn't practice in this area, but he kind of understands, the difficulty that it would take in order to mount an argument. And there are things that you would have to leap over. But again, we go back to, let's define our terms. What is an arm? Is an arm something that gives me the ability to defend my resources? Then at that point, an arm is the thing that does that. And that's what Bitcoin does. It defends me from seizure of my most valuable resource, which is financial, but the financial part is what I traded my time, my money, my experience, my lifeblood for, right? And so it gives me an opportunity to defend my own liberty from those that would take it, including and especially my own government.
Amen to that. The way I like to look at this is, First Amendment is the freedom of speech. One of my favorite descriptions or definitions of that is the purpose of the freedom of speech is so that our thoughts and ideas can go to battle and die so that our bodies don't have to, right? It's a way to resolve disputes rationally, dialogically, and non-violently. Obviously preferable. Like we don't want to have to fight to the death over every idea, every argument, every sandwich, as Lowery and I talked about before. It is one of the divine things about being human that we have this capacity for speech and the ability to make agreements and reach agreements non-violently. Now, obviously, that's backstopped by the threat of violence, but that should be a measure of last resort, right? We don't want to devolve to animality if we don't have to. And I think the long arc of human history is figuring out how to not have to do that, right? How do we resolve disputes any other way? We have social institutions, we have the rule of law, we have, jails, we have all kinds of stuff, right? That we don't have to just go to war, basically, anything but war. But it is ultimately backed by physical power, as we have covered today multiple times. So I think the sequence of amendments is important. We have the First Amendment because it's the highest and most important thing, the freedom of speech, again, so that you can engage in this truth discovery process with one another. And then the Second Amendment is to protect the First Amendment, right? Your right to engage if anyone tries to censor you or stop you or prevent you from speaking your mind or coerce you, right? We have the Second Amendment to maintain a symmetry of power projection capability between people. And this is very important, right? That's what Bitcoin is in a way, right? It's a symmetry of the application of rules. So it's a level playing field, if you will. And that's why it is so effective at rendering justice, basically. If you have one group of people that have the guns and a group of people that do not, you have an asymmetry of power projection capability. And I would say that asymmetry always leads to atrocity. If you look at human history, every time one group has a superior military technology over another, it gets exploited at some point, right? We're not saints. And even if one group of people don't exploit it, some group of people will come into power ultimately that do. I think that's what's happening in the Middle East right now, by the way. All right, we have the Zionist mafia with the superior military technology and all of their tentacles basically genociding a group of people that have inferior military technology. That's how history will regard it, in my opinion. We are, of course, inundated in all kinds of propaganda and bullshit about this being an ancient, interminable religious conflict. I think it's all bullshit. And with so many years of hindsight, I don't know how many it will take. That's how it will be looked at. But the lesson is clear, right? We need symmetry to have justice, right? We need symmetry of rules. We need symmetry of power projection capability. Some people, Bitcoiners specifically, get nervous about Bitcoin being classified or protected under the Second Amendment because they think it would open it up to regulation as a munition. What are your views? And then they also tend to throw Lowery under the bus and say, oh, he's a spook. He's trying to get Bitcoin regulated, all that. What are your guys' views on that?
So he's spoken on this a few times that he is a member of the military, mm-hmm. and the cohort that he's talking to is other people in the military. And he does want to convince them of the importance of Bitcoin. He, as mentioned in one podcast, he wants to take Bitcoin away from Treasury, potential regulation by another part of the U.S. government. So it's not like it's, all or none. If it's a military grade technology, it's regulated. If it's something else, it's not regulated. But I think if maybe behind Lowery's thought process as well, and reading this thesis, he humorously refers to himself as Major Jason Spook Lowery in his introduction. And he does have a sense of humor, but you see a strain of thinking in here where he sees the importance of warfare's utility to keep abstract power-based hierarchies from becoming oppressive. Mm-hmm. And so that is returning power to the people. Mm-hmm. And he sees Bitcoin as a way to do that. I think Bitcoin is a form of personal sovereignty, personal self-defense, that in the form of a militia almost, where people take defense into their own hands. He mentions at one point that he thinks it will change the idea of national defense because it's going to change the idea of nation. Once nations are not the guarantors of the freedom of speech or of the defense of property, what is the nation state? Why do we need it?
Right.
So there's enough, not hints, there's enough direct references in here to at least acquit Lowery of trying to urge this towards military regulation by the military or as a military grade technology or whatever. Again, I don't know the laws in this area, so I couldn't say if, and probably the law doesn't matter. It's going to come down to a contest of wills and in a political question of, you know, is there resentment at that time between the people who don't have Bitcoin and the people that do? Are there lobbies and whatnot? And that will resolve itself as a political question. And however it resolves itself, Bitcoin will keep on chugging along and doing what it does. But I think, I would just say that I don't think Lowery is trying to get it regulated. I think his thesis, if you read it in detail and understand where he's coming from, it's a persuasive account of Bitcoin as too important to regulate if we want to maintain dominance as an American people, aside from as the United States.
Right.
I think one thing that was very accurately predicted in The Sovereign Individual was that in the age of digital money, then restrictive regulations put on citizens would be counteracted not through vote, but through relocation.
Yes.
And we see that.
Yeah.
We're seeing this being acted out right now, where people have that choice and they can move. Now, not everyone does have that choice. Not everyone does have that resource. And so when you ask if am I nervous about Bitcoin being classified under the Second Amendment, I am not whatsoever, because and this is not an invitation, this is not a challenge, this is not a threat, but the hats that you see in Texas with the cannon on it and underneath it says, "Come and take it." The $5 wrench attack does exist, where you can beat someone's password out of them and they can give up their password. The problem with that, not problem, but the benefit with that is that it does not work at scale. We cannot do that. You cannot send out a military and individually beat the Bitcoin out of them in order to extract it, simply because you were unable to recognize the power of it. And there is, I think this is something that I do love about Bitcoiners, because they do proliferate in their efforts to educate other people, because they truly want to help. Like I genuinely go to bed at night fearful, worried about my parents and my siblings and their ability to survive in a post-fiat world. How can I orange pill them? How can I help move them along? Because of the stories from history that are so consistent. When we left a bimetallic standard as a globe, China lagged behind. And as a result, I think it's referred to as like the century of tears or something like that. Because in the span of like 15 or 30 years, they lost like 90% of their purchasing power against the world. And so it's not that, there is that awkward time. There is the awkward time between the switchover of fiat money and fiat power, which is political power, abstract power, and Bitcoin completely replacing those things. There is that awkward time in between where there will be just disorder and chaos. I recognize that will happen. Which is why, in my mind, we all cheer for different things, but I cheer for Bitcoin to so devastatingly obliterate fiat in an instant, because we're ripping the Band-Aid. Like, let's not do this thing that we did with fiat, where we bleed society for 100 years, and then finally we recognize, oh God, this has been an awful experience. We need to do something different. Let's flip it, then educate and move on. So no, I have no fear of classifying it as a munitions. China tries to outlaw Bitcoin mining, and what happens? It goes down to what, 60% of the hash power, and then it starts climbing again.
Yeah.
You know, the most oppressive most oppressive government in history cannot, and also the most subdued people.
Yeah.
Right. And the most self-domesticated. You know, can you imagine what you would do if your government told you how many kids you could have?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just don't think it's an issue. I think it's a fun little thought experiment, but I think in actuality, it's one of those, you know, Bitcoin does not need to be recognized. It will recognize itself. It will stand on the pedestal and proclaim its dominance. And you either step to it or you step against it, but you will step in line.
Yes. Yeah. It's very empowering to just self-organization, right? That, the example of China is useful because it is it's definitely the most brutal and authoritarian regime that's ever existed. Also, as a consequence of that, and their path-dependent history, it's like they're the most domesticated society, right? They're very, I don't want to use the word compliant. Let's say docile.
It's a low T continent, man.
Yeah, low T continent. All right, we put it that way. That's fair enough. And look, I'm not trying to do American exceptionalism over here. We got plenty of low T pockets, you know, all over the country. But you brought up Texas, like there's some very undomesticated pockets too, right? That people just have that come and take it attitude. And the $5 wrench attack, that is real. That's a threat. But I mean, even there's still functions inside of Bitcoin. I mean, a multi-key custody solution like that nips that in the bud, right? It's like, sure, you can come $5 wrench attack me, but you're not going to get my private key because guess what? I don't have the private key. It's in pieces and it's separated, and you know, you don't know who it is or where they are or the protocol or the sequence that's necessary to unlock that. And so brute force doesn't work anymore. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.